I'm Joe Rockey, and before we begin this episode of Father and Joe, I invite everyone to give us some feedback. In episode 383 and 384, we gave specific drills that you can implement in your life. What we are asking is, can you give us feedback upon implementing them and sending us the results to fatherandjoe@gmail.com. Thank you very much, and here is this upcoming episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks, and for the regular listeners of the show, as you just heard me get tongue-tied here for the first time in a long time, congratulations, guy. You got another little Easter egg there. But you know that I have a son. And yesterday, for pretty much the first time, he actually hurt himself in a meaningful-ish way. He was jumping up and down, caught his chin on a table, and ended up biting the inside of his lip. Yeah, painful. No way around that. Not awesome. And, you know, Teresa and I, we do all the basic stuff you're supposed to do, put ice on it, stop the bleeding, etc. And he asked us then the same question multiple different times that they're giving him the answer. And I took it as each time he asked me, he's actually asking me something different, but he doesn't know how to explain what he's trying to really ask. And the question he kept asking was, how did this happen? So the first time we give him just logistical play-by. You were freaking out, you were jumping up and down, you had a temper tantrum, and when you caught your jaw, boom, because you were yelling, your lip was in the way, and boom, it cut it. Okay, that's logistics. He settles down, he listens to it. 3 minutes later, how did this happen? And I'm like, there's no real point in keep repeating the same question, the same answer over and over again. How about if I try something different in terms of the answer? Maybe think he's asking something a little bit different. So I don't know which one of how did this happen this answer went to, but I eventually took it as, how did I get hurt when I was next to mommy and daddy? And then I go down through the answer with that. And I bring this up for not as to show a highlight example of, I'm a horrible parent, my kid's bleeding in my dining room, but to say there's a lot of times we don't know the right question to ask. And that in the gospel, I see Jesus get asked the same question a couple of different ways, not necessarily verbatim, but a couple of different ways. And he always kind of gives an answer that makes sense. So I bring this up from two perspectives. The first is how do we teach ourselves to truly understand what someone is trying to say, whether it be giving the answer or asking the question? How do we actually go about in doing that? Because when we see meaningful relationships and we see the conversation occur, especially when relationships we're not in, we just see two people interact. You can see this a lot with couples who have been around. If you actually would read a transcript of what they said, it doesn't quite add up. But they know each other and they know exactly what they mean, and etc. So my question is how do we learn and imbue that skill within ourselves? Because I think that doing that really opens up a lot of doors and makes ourselves easier to be in relationship with a better and makes more fruitful relationships.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well done.
Thank you.
You asked a question, set it up nicely, and I can certainly follow it. I'm wondering what your son was feeling. And I don't know that that's necessarily even the right question to ask him. I will exempt myself from the specifics on how to raise children and defer to those who know how to translate my conceptual world into that of a child. But I wonder what he's feeling, and that seems to be the important thing to help him get in touch with, and for whatever parents, those who will help him get in touch with it and to handle that, to understand what that is. And I love how you process. He's asking the same question again. Why is he asking it again? What does this mean? But yeah, it's coming from a place of pain, and maybe it's literally the pain itself. The pain is getting translated into, how did this happen? And there may be nothing that you can say that actually answers the question, because it's really what he wants to say is, I'm hurting. But instead he says, how did it happen? And so that's the kind of thing where being able to honestly express, to understand, and then to have the validation around what we're feeling is really important. And I can't remember if I said it in this podcast, but if I can describe a different situation that I thought was really powerful in this book, The Heart of Trauma by Bonnie Badenoch. She describes, first of all, that trauma happens not so much from the pain as from being alone in the pain. What happens when we're alone in the pain is we don't know how to connect the pain with, we don't know what to do with the pain. So it gets sort of stuck. And then a lot of times we can end up telling ourselves stories that can be self-shaming. So it's all my fault, or whatever that might be. Well, so anyway, she describes what happens when a child, a little girl, might be dropped off at preschool. She's feeling excited about going into the day, and then she sees on the playground 2 boys fighting, and she's getting scared, and she looks for somebody to help her, and the teacher is busy with another child who skinned his knee. And then she hears another little girl crying out for her mommy, and that she wants to go home. And now this little girl is flooded with a bunch of things she doesn't know how to process, and there's nobody to help her process it. So all of that's welling up inside of her. She doesn't really know entirely what she's feeling. It just feels bad. And then when she comes home to her mom, you can imagine maybe 2 different reactions. One is her eyes welling up with tears. Her mother says, "Oh, what's wrong?" And she starts to say, "The boys, the playground." And her mother says, "No, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Yeah, just get over it." And now there's a rift, because it feels like a big deal to her, but she was just told by the one that she trusts and is securely attached to that it's not a big deal. This is the one who's supposed to be helping her to interpret what she's feeling. And that person just invalidated what she's feeling. And so now that gets turned into a narrative. It's all my fault. I am supposed to do better. I imagine a different reaction. She comes home, her eyes are welling up with tears, and her mother says, "Oh, honey, what's wrong?" And she starts to tell her mother, and her mother just takes her and holds her and says, "It's okay, honey. I'm here with you, and we're going to make it through." And then there isn't any particular resolution to all of the threats, but what she's learned is that she's not alone in the pain, that her pain is real, that her mother loves her, and that it's going to be okay. So it's 2 very different reactions that cause very different consequences. And so anyway, getting in touch with the feelings that are happening there, the pain, the distress, and just to guess, like your son in some way. I love how you teased out, how could this happen when mommy and daddy were right there? That's a great insight. That's really scary, because probably you have protected him from all kinds of things. And he's learned that when you're around, things are good, which is a great lesson to
Well,
learn.
more so her. I mean, let's be honest. She's the protecting one.
Sure. And that's great. Now he gets to learn, well, even when something like this happens, mommy and daddy love me and we make it through. And that starts to develop resilience. And and I suppose that would be a thing to explore. Like, are you scared, buddy? What are you feeling? And maybe trying to tease out what that inner interpretation, what's he applying to these events? Are tables able to jump out and smash his lip at any time? Is there like these are the kinds of fears that we have, and when there are people there to help us navigate the foreignness, the strangeness of the world, that's really helpful. So you wanted to talk about asking questions and asking the right questions, and I took us down this path of how to help children process trauma.
I think it's a very good path, because we've talked about trauma being pain by itself. We have brought that up before, and one of the thoughts that I have, maybe it's a fear or whatnot, is that there's a lot of opportunities for that to happen in the course of a week, let alone a day. I said that backwards, but you guys know what I mean. So the point being is that I look at this and see that you never know which one ends up being the big one that sets permanently in the concrete. I heard another example about this being that our brains are kind of like pouring concrete out of a bag or out of a cement truck. Is that if you touch it when it's still wet, your handprint isn't going to stay in it. Yeah, your hand's going to get all wet, but eventually the concrete is going to return because it's all watery. It's going to return back to level. And if you touch it after it's dry, well, that's just walking down the street. You're not going to change the impression on the concrete. But if you touch it at that just right moment, your footprint can be in that concrete forever. And I was like, that's a really interesting and super depressing thought at the same time. And to me, it's interesting because that's kind of cool to know that that's how your brain works. But the reason I thought it was depressing, it was be like, that means I can be right 100% of the time when it's still in water. And theoretically, I can be right 100% of the time when it's broken. But if I have a bad batting average whenever we can actually put the foot in and leave the concrete in, that's really, really concerning. So in a certain sense, and this is just me letting out my inner parent, is that I'm kind of always on edge that I'm going to be in that zone and messing up when it's setting. Even though I understand that statistically speaking, you're probably going to basically be just as good before, during, and after. I understand that part too. But it kind of blends into that point, and what we were talking about before about being curious naturally puts you outside the box. And by being the box exists, from a mental standpoint, because in general, it kind of works. That's why it was the general culturally accepted way of doing something, because that's the box. That's what we do. It works. Okay, cool. There's some general-ish wisdom there. Not to say it can't be better and all that, but anyway, I bring this all up because of the pressure that I feel and how it culminates with the curiosity. Even as I was asking him last night about, the difference of how did this happen and giving him different answers, my thought process is, should I just be answering what he's asking? Or am I setting him up down the road for expecting answers that aren't what you're asking for? Should I be teaching him better to ask the right questions? And that's, I said, coming full circle with this conversation, but that's the feelings that are going on inside of me, that I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one living this.
Yeah. I guess just to comment on the first point that you're making, this sort of fearful concern, like, how bad am I going to mess up my kid, if I fail at the wrong time. They have a concept in psychology called good enough parenting.
Okay.
And what would that be? Well, it's really helping them to have the tools they need to work through whatever stuff you don't get right. And, for example, introducing them, your fatherhood is meant to be an approximate experience of God's fatherhood. You will fail at that, obviously. And so what's the corrective? Well, making sure that your son, that your kids come to know the real Father, the full Father, the God the Father. So also, having the kind of resilience, like it's one thing to the temptation today is to protect children, not to drop them off at preschool because of all the stressors that could be there. But that's not what Bonnie Bodnock is suggesting. She's saying, no, they're going to go through those things, but knowing they can come back to you. And the fundamental thing is the secure attachment. It's not so much about answers. It's about being seen and affirmed in what's happening in me now, and then maybe somebody that helps me to navigate that, but just not being alone in the pain. So just to reinforce more fundamental things, it's one thing. It's sort of like if you don't have any way to repair something, you need to make sure it doesn't get broken. But if you can build in the repair mechanisms, then it's okay. Not that it's optimal, but it's okay if it gets broken because the repair mechanisms are already built in. So
Mhm.
that's sort of what you're doing as you're raising your children, is you're doing the best you can not to let them get broken. But more importantly, you're trying to give them some of the repair mechanisms that can help once they will inevitably run into something, have some of those difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, well, I appreciate that. I'm not messing this up completely. But I think everyone sees the natural ability that this pathway can go as far as being fearful that I'm gonna mess it up. It's just part of the challenge. And I use this example here of the relationship I have with my son, but in reality, it's any relate. This is a concrete relationship thing. Is that how am I going to be remembered? Is this going to be the right thing? Is it, whatever the case may be, all these different fears we have in a relationship. And the Father, that's why I really enjoy our talks together, because building up the relationship skills, even if they're looked at from maybe not the most optimal angle. For example, when you dribble a basketball, you're supposed to have your hand directly on top of it. Well, if you're coming from a 45-degree angle, you can still dribble a basketball. It's just not as optimal. And I don't always ask the top of the basketball question. Sometimes I come in at it from the 45 degrees, and you're always able to know really what it is I'm supposed to be asking and be able to translate it in a way that everyone understands. So I greatly appreciate that. And we know that this is helpful, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's listened to us. We would invite anyone to give us feedback based upon the conversations we're having. You can send us an email, fatherandjoe@gmail.com, all written out. And we'd love to have your answers and feedbacks. And again, if you ever do have a question that you want Father or I to answer, we'd be more than glad to bring it up in an upcoming episode. So we thank you all for watching and listening. Please share us, leave a review, and we will be with you again next week.